Maganda umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning to everyone. I'm working on a complete rebuild of my main driver laptop, and this video is sort of the overview introduction. It'll be the next video we get into the nitty-gritty of actually doing it. So if that's what you're after, you probably want to skip this video, but if you want to understand my thought process, then this is a video for you. I'm running a Dualboot laptop running both Arch Linux and Windows 11. Been doing it for a year. The laptop's about 2 years old. I initially did this after it fell out of warranty. Now, you might ask why I'm using Arch, and when there's a lot of other simpler, easier to install distributions. Well, let's consider this rumination, probably more of a rant. I had tried a couple different distributions, Ubuntu, Mint, Manjaro, even a few of the gaming distributions like Garuda, and what I got to say is I'm an old person, I'm set in my ways, and I got a way I like to do things, and unfortunately it's not in the target audience for a lot of these distributions, which is why I keep finding myself going back to distributions like Debian or Arch or Gentoo or OpenSUSE. I mean, you got to understand your distro has a specific audience when they build it, but it's just not me. It may be you, in which case fine, but I find it much easier to start from scratch and build the system the way I want than I do to try and modify an existing distro that's done a few things I may not be real thrilled with. And I guess that wasn't much of a rant, so okay. Anyway, moving on. Let's get to the video, and like I say, this is again going to be a video on my thought process and what I did in the past, what I'm planning to do now. So take it for what it's worth. The next video after this one will actually be where I get down and dirty. Also, side note, I'm trying a new lavalier microphone, a new green screen here. Neither of them are very expensive, but I thought I'd give it a try and see how it worked out. Let me know what you think. So a little bit of backstory here before we get into this. I've had this laptop for about 2 years. After the warranty expired, I did some upgrades. I had one of those little warranty stickers on the back over a screw hole. People will say it doesn't matter. It does matter. It's just easier to deal with a company. And at the time, I was using a laptop for Windows, and I was running Linux on a 8th generation NUC, so I was covered there. But after a year, I decided to make some changes. So I did some memory upgrades, some storage upgrades, and I went for the dual boot system with Arch Linux and Windows 11. Now what I'm doing here is my second reboot of the rebuild, or the rebuild of the reboot, however you want to call it. I've over the last year found some issues with the way I originally did this, and a lot of this comes down to how I laid out the partitions on the drive, and when I tried to expand or contract them to make a change, it wasn't impossible, but it was difficult, not something I really wanted to get into at this point. And on the second rebuild, the majority of my workflow, like I say, back when I did the first rebuild, it was about 50% Windows, 50% Linux. Now it's about 90% Linux, 10% Windows. I still need Windows for a few things. One real example is I keep getting calls from various relatives when they're having problems with their computers, and I need something to go look at with Windows on it. Plus, there's a couple of programs I'm still using that are kind of Windows only, but I think I've got a way to get away from them. So I'm looking forward into the next 6 months to a year being totally Windows free. And I wanted to set up the partition scheme to make it easy to get rid of Windows and then reclaim the drive space. So that's another reason for this rebuild. Also, I wanted to add a bigger swap partition. I want to play around a little with hibernation. I know there's some issues with it on Linux, but I wanted to give it a try, but I need to have a big enough swap partition to actually do successful hibernation. And it needs to be one solid partition and not spread out across multiple drives. Another disclaimer here. This is my primary driver right now, the computer I primarily use, so it was really not possible to get a lot of screenshots of the actual rebuild, so I'm going to be doing it text-based, explaining it with some slides, and then I'll recreate or simulate it in a virtual machine just to show you what I did. It won't be exact. And I also want to say that this works for my laptop on this date. It may not work with your laptop. You probably have different hardware than I do. That's all right. And if it's a different date, operating systems move on. They evolve, they get versioned, whatever. So this works now for me. You're going to have to do some interpretation for your own hardware and for whatever versions of whatever operating systems you're using. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. And like I say, if you're not overly interested in my thought process, you can go ahead and jump ahead to the next video, which will probably be out in a week or two on the actual build process. All right. Okay, let's get going here. Let's first talk about the laptop I'm going to be working with. This is my main driver. It's an MSI Raider GE7612UE. If anybody really is worried about it, you can see it here on my desk, which is not as clean as it could be. You got the laptop. I've got a dock in the back, hooking it up to dual monitors as well as the screen. You see my mic there. I've got a little audio mixer. Those were both donated up to the upper right. You can see the old Nook, the old 8th generation Nook, which was my original main driver. And then I ran Linux on it for a while the laptop was still under warranty. You can see my hard drive dock there. And behind that is a B-Link computer. The B-Link and the Nook are now part of a Proxmox setup. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to be using that, but this is the setup. And that's, like I said, the laptop's my main driver, and I'm going to be doing a complete rebuild on it for a couple of reasons. So a year after I bought the laptop and it was out of warranty and I could break the little warranty sticker, and yes, I know people will say you don't need to do that or it's not really important, but it's just easier dealing with a company when you're dealing with warranty issues and you haven't changed anything. After the first year, I added additional memory and storage space. Laptop does have 2 NVMe drives and 2 memory slots. The core of the laptop is an Intel 12th generation i9 mobile processor. This is one of those hybrid processors, which it has 6 regular threaded cores, and then it has 8 efficiency cores for a total of 20 cores. I've been using this for a while. I mean, it works good. I just really haven't run any head-to-head comparisons against standard processors, so I can't really say whether that gives you any advantage or not. It works, what I can say. So I've got 64 gigabytes of DDR5 memory, 16 gigabytes what was originally installed when I bought the laptop, 2 8 gig sticks. I replaced those with 2 32 gig sticks. Again, dual memory slots. Originally, the laptop came with a 1 terabyte NVMe drive. I did say it has 2 NVMe drive slots. So when I did the upgrade, I added a second 2 terabyte NVMe drive. And again, the reason I waited for warranty was this: you got to take the back off to do either of these upgrades. I mean, they're not difficult. It's just, like I say, I got that little warranty sticker on the back. It's over one of the screw holes. And it just makes things simpler. I never actually had to deal with the company. I did call them a couple times, but it was minor stuff. The motherboard in the laptop has an Intel Iris Xe graphics built in. I mean, it's good. It's okay. I've actually used, because the 8th generation Nook had the Intel Iris graphics, and I actually used that to play some games on. So it's okay. It's not as good as a discrete graphics card, but it's not bad. And speaking of discrete graphic cards, also comes with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060 mobile. Again, mobile version, not quite the same as a desktop version, but still, it's several steps above the Intel Iris Xe graphics as far as that goes. And the laptop had Wi-Fi 6, has Wi-Fi 6, has Bluetooth 5.2, also has the integrated 1080p, I guess FHD means full high definition webcam, which is what I'm using to shoot these videos with. That or my phone, depending on where I'm at. One USB-C Thunderbolt port, Thunderbolt 4 port. It does have several other USB ports. USB 3, it's got a couple of A ports, and it's got another USB 3 with a C-type adapter port. So, I mean, the selection of ports, it could have been better, but it's not bad. It's got plenty of ports. It's also got a HDMI port on the back and a mini display port. Although in this case, I'm using a Thunderbolt dock. And when I bought this thing, it was advertised as 1 gigabit Ethernet, but when I went in with the software and poked around a bit, I found out it was actually a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, but that doesn't really matter. I still have some 1 gigabit stuff on my network, so that's what I'm limited to. But again, not bad. Okay, again, this is a purely informational, theoretical. The next video is going to have all the hard work of actually getting everything set up, but I want to talk about my previous Dualboot, which is something I set up when I did the upgrades. Again, warranty, calling the company, all that sort of stuff. But once it was out of warranty, I went ahead and Dualbooted the laptop. And this was my initial design for the 2 storage drives. And looking back on it now, I could have done a whole lot better. I could have done better. But this actually fits my workflow pretty good, and we're going to talk about that here. So I'm using both Windows 11 and Arch Linux equally at this point in time, about 50%, 50%. That's just the way it is, or it was back then. So both Arch Linux and Windows 11 needed access to my data and storage drives. Now, I do my work on the data drive, and then anything I want to keep on the laptop, but I don't work on regularly, goes in the storage drive. Data and storage gets saved to my regular backups, and stuff on the storage drive that's getting old and I'm probably not going to use anymore gets moved to long-term archive from my backups. That's just my workflow. But I set up links in both Windows 11 and Arch pointing to some of the common directories. This is not hard to do. I should probably do a video on this specifically, but again, videos, music, pictures, I move to storage. These are things I look at, but I don't really do anything with. Documents is where all my work goes, and like I said, I basically link the folders in my home folder in both Windows 11 and Arch to these folders. This is sort of what makes this a little more complicated than your standard Dualboot setup. And I gotta say, for a year, it worked pretty good. I was able to run Windows 11 and Arch and access all my files and folders. I did have issues in the past doing something like this when I was using Debian more, and this came to versions of programs, cross-platform programs installed on both Windows 11 and on the Linux partition. With Arch, I haven't had that problem because it's a rolling release and the various programs I use are always at the same update as the Windows 11 version. So it's worked out pretty good. Now, one thing I should have done differently here, I've got multiple swap spaces. Back in the past, when I was using mechanical hard drives, this was actually a good thing. You got better performance by breaking your swap across different mechanical drives because parallel access improved performance. It didn't really make any difference at all on solid state drives. So yeah, next time around, I'm just going to go with one large swap space on one drive. Not that I use swap space that much. I mean, I've been playing around with hibernation a little bit. So yeah, swap's necessary for that. It needs to be big enough, and swap space is used. It does a little more than just take over when you run out of RAM. So that's another video unto itself too. One problem with this setup is if you remove intermediate partitions like the Arch partition or the Windows 11, for example, if you try and shrink the Windows 11 partition and expand the Arch partition, it doesn't work too well. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible to do, it's just difficult. So a little forethought in setting up your partitions can save you some of this trouble here. And as I said earlier, I'm using the same open source applications on both Windows and on Linux, and I'm accessing the same files and it's working well. Again, when I was using Debian on my, well, not to knock Debian, I do use Debian on pretty much all my servers, but on the laptop where I'm accessing files with both Arch and Windows, Arch has the more updated user applications that match what's in Windows. Okay, moving on. New Dualboot setup or build. And people can argue about whether this is, well, they can argue about it. It works for me. That's what I'm going to say right here. And this is the big thing with Linux. Do what works for you. So you can see here, well, at the time of this current build I'm working on, my workflow and my workload has shifted. It was 50-50 Linux and Windows. Now I'm doing 90% of my work on Linux and only about 10% on Windows. I still have a few things I need Windows to do, but I'm also looking forward maybe 6 months to a year down the line, just totally doing away with Windows. We're going to see how that works out. One thing I do need Windows for is I keep getting requests for help on other people's laptops or computers that have Windows, so I do need something to reference, which, well, again, we'll see how things go. So one thing about doing 90% of my work on Linux is I no longer need shared drives, so I can take the, I don't think I mentioned it previously, but since Windows had to access the data and storage drives, they had to be formatted NTFS. That's your best option with Windows. Windows doesn't like to play nice with other operating systems. And FAT32 is, well, it's a very simple operating system. It's stable, it's reliable, but doesn't have a lot of features that NTFS has, like security and permissions and things. But since I'm pretty much not using Windows for any of my daily work, just a few specialized tasks, Windows does not need to access data and storage, so I can change the format to a better, more Linux-friendly file system. So I still need I still need Windows. So Windows, I don't want to be accessing the Windows system drive directly, so I will need a small data partition that is NTFS to save data from Windows 2 and transfer them between systems. This is a rarity now, but it's something I still need to do. Interestingly, I've tried several hypervisors over the past month with mixed results. Pass-through for hardware seems to be my biggest stumbling block there. But from my experience so far, Dualboot is a simpler and more efficient, more stable solution. At least for me, it is. Other people will have different results, but then again, other people have different workflows. So, but for my current workflow, yeah, dual booting was the best solution. The other thing I did was I shuffled my system drives to the end of the hard drive with my data and storage drives early on, right after the larger swap partition and the EFI drive. What this does is, say I get rid of Windows, and it's no sweat. It's very simple to expand data or just create another partition or place on top of data, expand it. It makes dealing with partitions when you change things easier. At least for me, it does. All right, next let's go ahead and talk about the process I'm going to be following, or I did follow. Well, going to be following, did follow, doesn't matter. So first thing I did is back up all my important personal data and configuration files, and this is not my normal backup. This is a special backup I did on external media that was attached directly to the computer rather than my network storage, and this was mainly for faster restoration of said data after I finished with the upgrade. The basic process for the upgrade is to boot into Arch Linux first, delete all the partitions, then you're going to want to create your EFI data and swap and storage partitions on your drives before booting up into Windows. Windows will obviously take the earliest first space it finds towards the start of the drive when you try to install it, so you need to put these partitions in first, so Windows won't be using that space. Then we boot into Windows Installer and we create our Windows 11 partitions. You can also create the data partition at this time if you want, and Windows will create the Microsoft Reserve partition for you. As you saw that, you don't have to create that. Remember, you're going to give a specific space for Windows. It's going to divide that up, and you're going to have a little 16 megabyte MS Reserve partition that it's going to create. So once you've done all this, you can go ahead and, if you want at this point, you can clean up your Windows install, or not. You can do it later. But after Windows is successfully installed, you want to go ahead and boot from Arch Linux, and you want to go ahead and install the Arch Linux, which is a whole subject unto itself. You'll understand why a lot of people say Arch is complicated in the next video when we go through the actual process. It's It's not difficult, it's just tedious and long. Most people have been using Linux for a while, could install Arch with no problem, and there are install scripts now for Arch, but again, it's just tedious and it's just long. And you'll see that as compared to the Windows 11 installation procedure. I mean, I could have used like Linux Mint or Ubuntu or something like that and had a similar install experience to Windows. But once you've installed Arch, you're going to have to add Windows to the Grub bootloader. Grub is an acronym for Grand Unified Bootloader. And again, this is because Windows does not play well with other operating systems. And you may or may not have to change the EFI boot order in the flash RAM so you can run Grub before the Windows bootloader runs. And we'll go over how to do that too. And then finally, you need to do a test boot each operating system, and you can go ahead and clean up your operating systems and set them up the way you want. And then after that point, you can go ahead and restore your data and go back to normal work. And that is basically it. As I said, in the next video, we're going to actually do this. All right, there we have it. That's my thought process, where I was, where I went to, where I'm going to now. I hope it's enlightening. Well, not enlightening. I hope it gives you something to think about at a minimum. You could probably argue I'm still not doing it the most efficient way, and there's going to be some people who say I need to use different types of file systems. But again, this is what works for me, and this is one of the great things about Linux, is you can use it and you can do what works for you, and the heck with what anybody else thinks. Well, not the heck, but you can read what other people think, and if you like it, you can use it. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it. That's what I like about That's what I like about Linux, which is different from Windows. Windows is Windows, and I know a lot of people like it because it's standardized, and Linux is not standardized. And a lot of people don't like making decisions, especially about things like their computer and operating systems. So again, you got to do what's comfortable for you. But this was my thought process. I just wanted to do a quick video on this because the actual hardware video, the actual nut and bolts video is probably going to be a lot longer. We'll see. Anyways, I hope you'll join me for that video. I hope you like, comment, subscribe if you want. Oh, and my wife told me to mention, if you make it this far to the end of the video, I do have a PayPal link if anybody wants to support my work, down in my link section of my page. I generally don't like to mention that, but it is there, and this is my hobby, so I do it because I enjoy doing it. But again, my wife's a little more practical than me, I guess, but she told me to mention that, so I mentioned it. Anyway, we'll catch you all next time around.